Capitol Hill. Thank you very much. We're joined now by Congressman Jim Himes. He's a key member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Good evening, Wolf.
So we're expecting President Trump to back down any moment now in his effort to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census, but he's apparently going to take another path to try to compile existing data on citizenship. But what does that tell you?
Yeah, Wolf, that's baloney. The president has no interest in real data about citizenship. The president and his people understood that if they threatened a citizenship question on the census, that would create fear in immigrant communities. Fortunately, of course, the courts have turned that effort back. And look, that's not my words, right? The Supreme Court said in legal language that the administration lying about why they wanted the citizenship question. So the good news is it's not going to happen. The bad news is, of course, it's been out there long enough that at least part of the president's objective has been achieved. There is concern out there in immigrant communities, which sometimes are communities that don't have access to as much information as other communities. And so there's already a fair amount of fear out there. But make no mistake, this was not about gathering data on U.S. citizens. This was yet another, along, by the way, a piece with the threatened raids this weekend, another way to scare our immigrant communities.
Well, on that point, do you think it's safe for immigrants here in the United States to participate in the census?
Of course it's safe for immigrants to participate in the census. By law, census staff are forbidden from sharing information with any other agency of the United States government. That is a law. And by the Constitution of the United States, not even law, but by the Constitution of the United States, a census must count every single person, not citizen, not green card holder, not immigrant, but every single person in the United States. So no, and I want to say this again because it's so important, the census people, the staff at every level are by law forbidden from sharing information with any other agency or department of the United States government.
All this is coming, Congressman, as the administration is gearing up to conduct formal and extensive deportation raids in 10 cities as early as this Sunday. Are you concerned with how this operation is going to be carried out? We've got a list of those 10 cities. There you see them right there: New York, Baltimore, Chicago, Atlanta, New Orleans, Miami, Houston, Denver, San Francisco, and Los Angeles.
Yeah, of course I'm concerned, Wolf. You know, and again, it's kind of my previous answer. This has very little to do with the rule of law. We are a country of laws. Rule of law is important, but make no mistake, this is about creating fear, just like the citizenship question is about creating fear. You know, someday maybe we get to have a good conversation about the difference between somebody who is here on an undocumented basis, let's call it a dreamer, somebody who was brought here as an infant, who knows no other country, and how we deal with that person, versus somebody who just snuck across a border with the intent to deal drugs on the other end of the extreme. If we're a good country, if we're truly a rule of law country, we will make a distinction between those two people and handle them differently. But of course, what the president is doing is just saying, you know, we're sending men with guns into our cities. That's not about policy. That's about creating fear in the immigrant community, which is the hallmark of this president's administration.
On a different subject, Congressman, your committee, the House Intelligence Committee, is going to hear directly from the former Special Counsel Robert Mueller next week. But you say we shouldn't expect any big headlines. Are you purposely trying to lower our expectations?
Well, yes, I'm purposely trying to lower your expectations, but boy, do I ever believe that I'm right when I say that. I know Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is more than anybody else within 100 square miles of the Capitol, a very serious individual, very disciplined. He says what he means, and he means what he says. And so though there will be all sorts of attempts to get him to say new things and to make news, it just ain't going to happen. Now, he is, I think, going to be asked, and probably will go through elements of his report, which I think is really important, right? This report has very detailed information, including pictures of the social media, for example, that the Russians used to influence our election. And it's really worth the American people spending some time with that so that they can come to understand how the Russians attacked our elections and hopefully be better armed in the next couple of elections to what might actually be the efforts of a foreign country. So I think it's valuable, but no, I stand by what I've been saying all along, which is nobody should expect any bombshells from Bob Mueller.
But at the same time, Congressman, as you know, most Americans certainly have not read the full 450-page Mueller report. Won't it be newsworthy? Won't it be significant for the American public to hear the special counsel in his own words?
Well, for two reasons. The one I just gave, which is that Americans really need to be familiar. Look, whatever you think of, whether Don Jr. should have met with Russians, whatever you think of the president's obstruction of justice or no obstruction of justice, I understand those are very partisan, very angry questions. What should be of interest to every single American is understanding how the Russians manipulated us in the 2016 elections, how they used racial fissures, how they used religious groups, how they created fake rallies. Americans need to understand that so that next time around when they see social media, and let's face it, we're in a world where people live on social media, they maybe say to themselves, whoa, this may not actually be what it appears to be. This may be Russia or North Korea or Iran or China trying to manipulate me as a U.S. Citizen. And I think that's really important. The other reason it's really important is, I mean, let's face it, when the Mueller report, before the Mueller report came out, the Attorney General came out with a memorandum which it would be overly kind to call it spin. This Attorney General basically came out and said a bunch of things that were not in the report, so much so, by the way, that Bob Mueller had to contradict him. So I think it is important to revisit that and say, hey, here's what this report really said and didn't say, because it didn't say that the president was exonerated of obstruction of justice, very much the contrary. And people need to understand that from the guy who actually investigated and wrote the report.
Earlier today, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tried to quash this growing dispute with some of the freshman Democrats, including Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who accused Nancy Pelosi of singling out the newly elected women of color. Her words. Why has this become so contentious?
Well, I kind of wish that was not the language that my colleague from New York had used. Nancy Pelosi is not in any way, shape, or form racist, and I think you had a tape earlier of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez acknowledging that. Here's what's happened. It is not some newsworthy gulf within the Democratic Party. We are a huge and diverse party. We have people from all over the country, gay, straight, rich, poor, black, white, immigrant, not immigrant, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. Yeah, it's a little bit of a management problem, and there are some growing pains in this new majority. One of the things we're working on figuring out for people who spend a lot of time talking in public, we need to learn that we share our disagreements and should do so with vibrancy, and we should disagree and argue and everything else, but like a family, on the outside, we have to be united. We need to keep our disagreements to ourselves. We need to not use tweets and Facebook to criticize each other. That is how we're going to win as a party going forward. And we're still figuring that out.
What's the impact? What's going to be the impact of all this on the Democrats' ability to unify going into the elections in 2020?
Well, look, every episode like this is an opportunity, and I said this actually I've said this in a number of groups of Democrats ever since we had the episode, which is that, look, we should have a vibrant conversation. We should criticize each other's policy ideas. We should compare and debate. We should never attack each other's motives. We should never say that you're corrupt or you're a segregationist or anything else. We shouldn't say that, period. We sure as heck shouldn't say that publicly. So, I mean, my counsel to my caucus is let's keep the arguments focused on policy. Let's compare policies. And for God's sake, let's not get personal, and let's certainly not get personal on social media and, outside the walls of the family, if you will. Because it did.